Let's begin with a structural overview. Welcome to another lecture. Today we examine Memorial Day in the United States, a day that, at its best, is both intimate and national in scale. I am Professor Alexei, and with me is Priyanka. Together we will trace the holiday's origins, its evolving meanings, and the perennial question of how to honor the fallen with both rigor and heart.
Hi everyone, I'm Priyanka. I think what drew me to this topic is how, a single day can carry so much memory and also so many debates about how we remember.
To frame our discussion, Memorial Day is a U.S. federal holiday dedicated to mourning military personnel who died while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. Historically called Decoration Day, it arose in the aftermath of the Civil War, when communities gathered to adorn soldiers' graves with flowers. Over time, particularly following the World Wars, the commemoration broadened from Civil War dead to all who fell in U.S. service, which distinguishes it from Veterans Day, which honors all who served, and Armed Forces Day, which honors those currently serving.
Maybe the best place to begin is by asking the question. When we say US Armed Forces, we mean the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Space Force, and Coast Guard, right? And what was the Grand Army of the Republic that keeps coming up in the readings?
It's important to understand the institutional actors. The Grand Army of the Republic, or GAR, was a fraternal organization of Union Civil War veterans that became a primary organizer and promoter of Decoration Day in the North. The GAR codified ceremonies, proposed orders of service, and popularized late spring grave decoration. Later, the term Memorial Day entered usage, and in 1967 became the official federal name. In simpler terms, the GAR supplied the ritual blueprint, while the nation gradually adopted the new nomenclature. Moving forward, why does this matter now? Because Memorial Day is a civic mirror. It reflects how a society accounts for the costs of war. We observe a persistent tension between solemn remembrance and the gravitational pull of a long weekend. Veterans organizations have cautioned that travel, sales, and spectacle can eclipse the purpose. Yet we also observe new practices, like a 3 p.m. national moment of remembrance, that try to refocus attention toward loss, gratitude, and continuity.
I think the next thing we should talk about is the basics people often forget. It's now the last Monday of May, but it used to be a fixed date. And the flag rule is unusual, right?
Correct. The Uniform Monday Holiday Act of 1968 shifted observance to the last Monday in May. The change took effect federally in 1971. Before that, May 30 was the customary date. As for the flag, on Memorial Day it is raised briskly to full staff, then lowered to half staff until noon, and returned to full staff for the remainder of the day. The morning signifies mourning. The afternoon signals the living commitment to carry forward the legacy of those who died. It is one of the most distinctive points of U.S. flag etiquette. Let's start with the history. The first nationwide Decoration Day occurred on May 30, 1868, after General John A. Logan of the GAR issued his May 5th order. That year, 183 cemeteries in 27 states held memorial exercises. By 1869, 336 cemeteries participated. A century later, in 1971, the Monday observance became the federal standard. Between those poles lies a rich story of diffusion from local ritual to national calendar.
Can we pause for a personal moment? Sometimes small details make the meaning clearer.
Of course, the first time I heard taps played in person at a Memorial Day ceremony, there was a brief moment when even the ambient city noise seemed to hesitate. We all stood in silence. Then the flag rose to full staff at noon, and the soundscape resumed. It is a modest choreography, yet it encodes grief in the morning and resilience after midday, a ritual algorithm that is easy to follow and hard to forget. As we continue, three big questions will guide us. First, the historical question: where did Memorial Day originate? Second, the counterfactual: what if Memorial Day had never moved to a Monday? Third, the open policy and culture question: how might we better balance solemnity with contemporary observance?
Building on that, can we start with origins? There are so many claims. How do we sort them without, picking favorites?
Let's transition to another aspect. The evidentiary record shows diverse early practices of decorating soldiers' graves during and after the Civil War. We have a well-documented event on May 1st, 1865, in Charleston, South Carolina, where recently freed Black residents reburied 257 Union dead and held a massive parade. Historian David Blight highlighted this as a powerful early commemoration. We also have Mary Ann Williams of the Ladies Memorial Association in Columbus, Georgia, who on March 11, 1866, called for an annual Southern date, widely reprinted, effectively coordinating April 26 observances. In the North, General John A. Logan's 1868 order standardized a nationwide Decoration Day on May 30th, quickly embraced by states and communities. Parallel and sometimes competing origin stories appear elsewhere. Columbus, Mississippi, where women decorated both Confederate and Union graves in April 1866. Boalsburg, Pennsylvania, with a claim first published in 1904 that contains inconsistencies. Jackson, Mississippi, where Sue Landon Vaughn's late appearing account is contradicted by contemporary sources. And Warrenton, Virginia, with a 1906 report about John Quincy Marr's decorated grave in 1861. In 1966, President Lyndon Johnson recognized Waterloo, New York, as the official birthplace. Scholars have questioned that exclusive designation. In simpler terms, the holiday emerged not from a single spark, but from many candles lit in a dark time.
I'm curious about the role of women's groups you mentioned. Were they mainly caretakers of cemeteries, or did they also shape the rituals and the narratives about the war itself?
It is worth noting that women's leadership was foundational. Ladies' memorial associations in the South organized cemetery care, set observance dates, and codified rituals of decoration and prayer. They influenced public memory, in some cases advancing the lost cause narrative. In the North, the Women's Relief Corps supported JR-led ceremonies and cemetery stewardship. Their efforts created durable structures of remembrance. Without them, the transition from ad hoc mourning to coordinated annual observances would have been far slower. Meanwhile, the creation of the United States National Cemetery System provided geographic anchors for these rituals. By 1870, nearly 300,000 Union dead had been reinterred in 73 national cemeteries, and these sacred spaces turned private grief into shared civic experience.
So moving on. The Monday move. Why did Congress do it? And what happened to public meaning when it became a 3-day weekend?
This logically leads us to policy design. In 1968, Congress passed the Uniform Monday Holiday Act to provide workers and families with predictable 3-day weekends. Memorial Day shifted accordingly, with federal implementation in 1971. Supporters emphasized convenience and participation. Critics warned of dilution. The cultural feedback loop is well documented. By the mid-20th century, the name Memorial Day had become standard. The move to Monday reinforced its informal status as the start of summer. Veterans organizations, including the VFW in 2002, periodically urged a return to May 30th to restore focus. Yet there is a counter-consideration. A long weekend can facilitate travel to cemeteries and family gatherings that sustain remembrance. The net effect empirically is mixed. It amplifies both leisure and access.
Can we maybe now look at the hypothetical? If the date went back to May 30th, would we gain solemnity but lose participation? Or is that a false trade-off?
Theoretically, we observe trade-offs. Returning to May 30 might recalibrate the cultural script away from generic weekend recreation. It could also reduce attendance at distant grave sites for those who rely on a long weekend. Historically, tensions between commemoration and festivity predate the Monday shift. Consider 1911 and 1923 debates over holding the Indianapolis Motor Speedway race on Memorial Day. Aging GAR members protested what they saw as revelry on a day of mourning. In other words, the solemnity challenge is structural, not merely calendrical. Changing the date alters incentives. It does not by itself solve the problem of attention. On to our next point. How do we balance solemnity with contemporary observance? The repertoire is robust. Volunteers place flags on veterans' graves in national cemeteries. Communities hold parades and roll calls of the fallen. The National Memorial Day concert on the West Lawn of the U.S. Capitol uses music and readings to narrate service and sacrifice. The bugle call taps functions as a sonic ritual. And since 2000, a 3 p.m. national moment of remembrance invites a brief synchronized pause across time zones. Even a stadium can fall silent for 60 seconds without losing the game. Small acts scale remarkably well.
What comes to mind next is the individual level. If I am one person with, limited time, what can I actually do to keep the focus where it belongs?
In simpler terms, think of layered rituals. First, observe the 3 p.m. moment. Silence is free and portable. Second, if possible, visit a cemetery, read names aloud, place a flag or flowers. These micro acts have macro meaning. Third, teach a younger person the difference between Memorial Day, Veterans Day, and Armed Forces Day. Fourth, consider the poppy. Popularized in the United States after In Flanders Fields and Moyna Michael's advocacy, adopted by the American Legion in 1920, it remains a visible emblem of remembrance. Finally, learn a local story. Charleston, 1865. A town parade begun in 1867. The establishment of a nearby national cemetery. When remembrance is specific, it is resilient.
From a different angle, do we know if the national moment of remembrance actually changes behavior or attitudes? Like, are there studies on this civil ritual effect?
Arguably, this is where research lags practice. We can infer, using Robert Bella's concept of American civil religion, that such rituals bind private grief to public identity. But we need more data. Survey experiments could test whether exposure to the 3 p.m. pause increases knowledge of the holiday's purpose. Field studies could assess whether local ceremonies boost later civic participation. The point is not to mechanize mourning, rather, to evaluate which practices best preserve meaning in a crowded informational marketplace. Speaking of crowded marketplaces, one historical aside, with dry honesty. An 1884 GAR handbook described Memorial Day as the day of all days to mobilize support for veterans' pensions, and with disarming practicality, advised families to exercise great care in keeping veterans sober on the day.
Isn't it interesting how realism and reverence can coexist? Maybe that is the holiday's deeper lesson. We honor sacrifice while managing, human nature.
To summarize, Memorial Day is a federal day of mourning for U.S. service members who died in uniform, now observed on the last Monday in May. We traced contested and complementary origin stories, from Charleston in 1865 to Logan's 1868 order, and the vital role of women's associations and national cemeteries. We examined the implications of the Monday move, and we considered pragmatic ways to balance solemnity with contemporary life, including the 3 p.m. moment of remembrance, flag protocol, and community rituals.
And just to keep categories clear, Veterans Day on November 11th honours all who served. Armed Forces Day honours those currently serving. Memorial Day is for those who died in service. 3 days, 3 distinct purposes, all connected but not interchangeable.
This then completes our present analysis. Thank you for listening to another lecture. We encourage you to read a name, lay a flower, and pause at 3 p.m. Small rituals, large memory.
That was helpful to think through, actually. Thank you, Professor. And thanks to everyone for joining us.